June 6, 1944. A date that would forever change the course of World War II and human history itself. As dawn broke over the choppy waters of the English Channel, the largest amphibious invasion force ever assembled began its fateful approach to the beaches of Normandy, France. This is the story of D-Day, a story of incredible courage, meticulous planning, devastating losses, and ultimate triumph. Over the next hour, we'll dive deep into every aspect of this monumental operation, from the years of preparation to the bloody battles on 5 beaches, and explore how this single day set in motion the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi occupation. To truly understand D-Day, we need to step back and examine the strategic situation facing the Allies in 1943 and early 1944. By this point in the war, the tide was beginning to turn against Nazi Germany, but victory was far from assured. The Soviet Union had managed to halt the German advance at Stalingrad and was pushing westward, but at tremendous cost. Joseph Stalin had been pressuring the Western Allies, primarily Britain and the United States, to open a second front in Western Europe to relieve pressure on the Eastern Front. The Americans had been in the war since December 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his military advisors, particularly General George C. Marshall, favored a direct approach, build up forces in Britain, and launch a cross-channel invasion into France as soon as possible. The British, led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, were more cautious. They remembered all too well the horrors of trench warfare in World War I and the disastrous Dieppe raid of 1942, where Canadian forces suffered catastrophic casualties attempting an amphibious assault on the French coast. The compromise came in the form of a Germany-first strategy combined with operations in North Africa and Italy. American and British forces successfully expelled German and Italian forces from North Africa by May 1943, then invaded Sicily in July and mainland Italy in September. While these campaigns tied down German divisions and knocked Italy out of the war, they didn't constitute the major second front Stalin demanded, nor did they offer the most direct route to the heart of Nazi Germany. By late 1943, the strategic decision was made. 1944 would be the year of the cross-channel invasion. The operation was codenamed Operation Overlord, and it would be the most complex military undertaking in history. In December 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Ike, as he was known, was a brilliant organizer and diplomat who had the difficult task of coordinating American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces into a cohesive fighting machine. His deputy was British Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, while General Bernard Montgomery, the hero of El Alamein, would command all ground forces during the initial phase of the invasion. The planners faced seemingly insurmountable challenges. How do you transport over 150,000 troops across 100 miles of open water, land them on a hostile shore defended by the most powerful military force in Europe, and establish a foothold strong enough to withstand the inevitable counterattack? Every aspect of the operation required innovation and meticulous planning. First, they needed to choose where to land. The Pas-de-Calais region was the closest point between England and France, only about 20 miles across the Dover Strait. This made it the obvious choice, and the Germans knew it. Hitler had ordered the construction of the Atlantic Wall, an extensive system of coastal fortifications stretching from Norway to the Spanish border, with the heaviest concentration at Pas-de-Calais. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox, had been placed in charge of defending the French coast and was working feverishly to strengthen these defenses. Instead, the Allies chose Normandy, about 150 miles to the southwest. The beaches there were less heavily defended, and the region offered the potential to capture the port of Cherbourg. The coastline selected was divided into 5 sectors. From west to east, they were codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. American forces would assault Utah and Omaha, British forces would take Gold and Sword, and Canadian forces would land at Juno. But landing was only the first challenge. The assault troops would need to be followed by supplies, reinforcements, and heavy equipment. The Allies couldn't count on capturing a major port intact. The Germans would certainly destroy port facilities if they lost them. The solution was audacious. They would bring their own portable harbors, codenamed Mulberry Harbors. These massive artificial harbors would be towed across the channel in pieces and assembled off the Normandy coast. The Allies also needed to achieve air superiority, which required months of bombing campaigns against German aircraft factories, rail yards, and airfields. They needed specialized equipment, amphibious tanks that could swim ashore, armored vehicles equipped with mine-clearing flails, flamethrowers, and bridging equipment. The British 79th Armored Division developed these specialized vehicles, collectively known as Hobart's Funnies, after their commander, Major General Percy Hobart. Perhaps the most crucial element of D-Day's success had nothing to do with weapons or ships. It was deception. The Allies developed an elaborate scheme called Operation Fortitude to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. Operation Fortitude was a masterpiece of misdirection. The Allies created an entirely fictional army group in southeastern England, the 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, whom the Germans respected and feared as America's most aggressive commander. This phantom army was brought to life through fake radio traffic, dummy tanks, and landing craft that German reconnaissance planes could photograph, and double agents feeding false information to German intelligence. The deception worked brilliantly. Even after D-Day, Hitler and many German commanders remained convinced that Normandy was a diversion and that the real invasion would still come at Calais. This belief kept crucial German panzer divisions immobilized in the Pas de Calais region for weeks after the invasion, unable to reinforce the Normandy front when they were most desperately needed. The British also ran Operation Bodyguard, an even broader deception plan that included fake preparations for invasions of Norway and southern France. German intelligence was thoroughly confused, unable to determine where and when the hammer would fall. By late May 1944, southern England had become one vast military camp. Over 1.5 million American soldiers were stationed in Britain, joined by hundreds of thousands of British, Canadian, and other Allied troops. The assembly of forces was staggering in its scope. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels of all types, from battleships to landing craft, over 11,000 aircraft, thousands of vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces, and mountains of supplies, ammunition, and fuel. The soldiers themselves came from diverse backgrounds. Many were veterans of campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Others were green troops who had never seen combat. Some were elite units: the American Rangers, British Commandos, Canadian paratroops, and the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. Many were ordinary infantrymen, the backbone of any army. In the days before the invasion, these men were moved to marshalling areas near the embarkation ports. They were isolated from the civilian population to maintain security. Operation Overlord was the worst-kept secret of the war, but the specific date and location remained unknown. The troops attended briefings where they saw maps, photographs, and models of their objectives. For the first time, they learned exactly where they would be fighting. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that what lay ahead would be dangerous. No one knew if the invasion would succeed. Eisenhower visited troops throughout southern England in the final days before D-Day, talking with soldiers, boosting morale, and privately dreading the casualties to come. He even prepared a statement taking full responsibility in case the invasion failed, a statement that, thankfully, he would never need to deliver. Operation Overlord would actually begin not at dawn on the beaches, but in the darkness of early morning inland from the coast. American and British airborne forces would parachute or land in gliders behind German lines to secure key objectives, disrupt enemy communications, and prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. The U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were tasked with landing on the Cottonton Peninsula behind Utah Beach. Their objectives were to secure the causeways leading inland from Utah Beach, capture the town of Sainte-Mère-Église, destroy bridges over the Douve River to prevent German counterattacks from the west, and generally cause havoc behind enemy lines. The British 6th Airborne Division would land on the eastern flank near Sword Beach. Their mission was to capture intact the bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River, vital for the advance inland, and destroy bridges over the Dives River to protect the invasion's eastern flank. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, the first aircraft took off from English airfields. C-47 transport planes carried paratroopers, while gliders, essentially engineless aircraft towed behind powered planes, carried heavier equipment and additional troops. The crossing of the channel was tense but uneventful. The real problems began when the formations reached the Normandy coast. Heavy cloud cover and German anti-aircraft fire scattered the formations. Many pilots flying through darkness and flak released their paratroopers too early, too late, or off course. Instead of dropping in concentrated units, the American airborne forces were scattered over hundreds of square miles. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned, weighed down by their equipment. Others landed miles from their intended drop zones and spent hours in darkness trying to find their units. Yet this chaos had an unexpected benefit. The Germans, confronted with reports of paratroopers landing across a vast area, couldn't determine the main thrust of the airborne assault. Their responses were confused and uncoordinated. Small groups of American paratroopers following their training began linking up and attacking German positions wherever they found them. Private John Steele of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment had an unforgettable experience. His parachute caught on the church steeple in Sainte-Mère-Église, leaving him dangling helplessly while a battle raged in the town square below. He played dead for 2 hours until he was captured by Germans. The town was captured by American paratroopers shortly after dawn and holds the distinction of being the first French town liberated on D-Day. Meanwhile, the British airborne operation went considerably more smoothly. In one of the war's most daring actions, 6 gliders carrying troops of the 2nd Battalion, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, led by Major John Howard, landed within yards of the Caen Canal Bridge, later named Pegasus Bridge, at exactly 16 minutes past midnight. In a brief, fierce fight, they captured the bridge intact. This textbook operation secured a vital crossing point and demonstrated the potential of glider-borne troops. By dawn, neither the American nor British airborne forces had achieved all their objectives, but they had succeeded in their primary mission. They had created confusion behind German lines and made it more difficult for the enemy to organize an effective response to the beach landings. While paratroopers were fighting inland, the greatest armada ever assembled was crossing the English Channel. Over 5,000 ships, ranging from battleships and cruisers to tiny landing craft, were converging on Normandy. The crossing had been delayed 24 hours due to terrible weather, and conditions were still far from ideal. Waves ran 3 to 6 feet high, and many soldiers, crammed into small landing craft for hours, became violently seasick. The invasion had nearly been postponed again. Eisenhower had met with his meteorologist on the evening of June 4th, and the forecast was grim: storms and high winds that would make an amphibious landing extremely dangerous. The invasion scheduled for June 5th was postponed. But then Group Captain James Stagg, Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, reported a brief window of marginally acceptable weather on June 6th. Eisenhower had to decide: go ahead with uncertain weather or postpone again, which might mean waiting weeks for the next suitable combination of tides, moon phase, and weather. At 4:15 a.m. on June 5th, Eisenhower made the decision: okay, let's go. Operation Overlord was on. As the Armada approached the French coast in the pre-dawn darkness of June 6th, the massive naval bombardment began. Battleships and cruisers opened fire with their heavy guns, hurling shells weighing up to a ton at German coastal fortifications. The sound was deafening, and the flashes of the guns lit up the dark sea. Destroyers moved closer to shore, adding their firepower. Thousands of rockets were fired from specially equipped landing craft. The bombardment was intended to soften up German defenses before the troops landed. In some sectors it was effective, destroying bunkers and cratering the beach obstacles. In others, particularly at Omaha Beach, much of the naval gunfire fell inland or failed to destroy the well-constructed German fortifications. At approximately 6:30 a.m., as gray dawn broke over a gray sea, the first landing craft touched down on the beaches of Normandy. The assault waves were going in. The westernmost landing site, Utah Beach, had been added to the invasion plan at the insistence of American commanders who wanted a beach close to Cherbourg. The 4th Infantry Division, part of 7th Corps, would make the assault, preceded by DD, Duplex Drive, amphibious Sherman tanks. Due to strong currents and poor visibility, the landing craft drifted south of their intended landing zone. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of President Theodore Roosevelt and, at 56, the oldest man in the assault wave, was assistant commander of the 4th Infantry Division. He had pleaded to go in with the first wave, and now, realizing they had landed in the wrong location, he made a crucial decision. After quickly reconnoitering the area, he reportedly said, "We'll start the war from right here," and decided to proceed with the landing at this new location rather than trying to move to the planned beaches. This accidental landing actually proved fortunate. The area where they came ashore was less heavily defended than their original target. Supported by the DD tanks that had successfully made it to shore, the infantry pushed inland rapidly. Linking up with elements of the 101st Airborne, they secured the causeways leading off the beach. Of the 5 beaches, Utah had the lightest casualties, fewer than 200 killed, wounded, or missing out of 23,000 troops landed on D-Day. It was a striking success, achieving all its objectives by nightfall. If Utah was the success story of D-Day, Omaha Beach was its nightmare. The beach, about 6 miles long, was overlooked by 100-foot bluffs honeycombed with German fortifications. The defending 352nd Infantry Division was one of Germany's better units, and unknown to Allied intelligence, it had been moved into the sector for anti-invasion exercises shortly before D-Day. The assault on Omaha was entrusted to V Corps, with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one, and the 29th Infantry Division making the initial landings. Almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The DD tanks, launched too far from shore in rough seas, nearly all sank. 27 of 32 tanks were lost, drowning many of their crews. The specialized demolition teams tasked with clearing beach obstacles took heavy casualties and were unable to complete their mission. The naval and air bombardment had failed to destroy the German defenses. As the landing craft approached shore through rough seas, German gunners in concrete bunkers and fortified positions on the bluffs had clear fields of fire. The ramps dropped, and German machine guns opened fire. Men were cut down as they exited the landing craft. Some boats took direct hits from artillery, exploding in clouds of flame and shrapnel. Those who made it into the water faced a struggle to reach shore while weighed down with 60 pounds or more of equipment. Many drowned. Those who reached the beach found themselves pinned down at the water's edge or huddled behind the limited cover of a seawall and shingle bank. The scene was one of utter chaos and carnage. Bodies floated in the surf. Wounded men cried for medics. Equipment littered the beach. Officers and NCOS were cut down trying to rally their men. Some units lost all their officers in the first minutes. Radio communications broke down. Landing craft coxswains, seeing the slaughter, were reluctant to bring their boats in. For several hours, the situation at Omaha hung in the balance. Some landing craft returned to their ships reporting the beach was untenable. Aboard the command ship USS Augusta, General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, considered evacuating Omaha and diverting follow-up forces to Utah and the British beaches. But on the beach, small groups of men began to move. Destroyer captains, seeing the desperate situation, brought their ships dangerously close to shore to provide direct fire support against German positions. Individual soldiers and small teams began working their way up the bluffs, finding draws and paths through the defenses. Officers like Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment rallied men with words that became legendary. Two kinds of people are staying on this beach: those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. Rangers at Point du Hoc, a promontory between Utah and Omaha, scaled 100-foot cliffs under fire to destroy what intelligence reported were heavy gun batteries threatening both beaches. They discovered the guns had been moved, but they found and destroyed them inland and held their position against fierce German counterattacks despite losing more than half their force. Slowly, through individual acts of courage and small unit leadership, the Americans gained footholds on top of the bluffs. By late afternoon, they had penetrated inland, though not nearly as far as planned. By nightfall, they held a tenuous beachhead barely a mile and a half deep. The cost had been terrible. Estimates vary, but American forces suffered approximately 2,000 casualties at Omaha Beach on D-Day, with around 1,000 killed. Entire companies had been decimated. The 16th Infantry Regiment alone lost over 1,000 men. It was the bloodiest of the 5 beaches, but it was held. Moving east along the coast, Gold Beach was assigned to the British 50th Northumbrian Infantry Division, veterans of campaigns in North Africa. The beach was defended by less formidable fortifications than Omaha, but it still had its share of obstacles, mines, and defensive positions. The British landing, scheduled for nearly an hour after the Americans due to tidal differences, benefited from the longer naval bombardment and the availability of Hobart's funnies, the specialized armored vehicles. Flail tanks cleared paths through minefields, while AVRES, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, used fascines, bundles of logs, to fill in anti-tank ditches and petards to destroy concrete fortifications. Despite these advantages, the initial landings still faced stiff resistance. The village of La Hamel was strongly defended, and its bunkers commanded the beach approaches. Fighting through La Hamel took most of the day. At La Rivière, another fortified position, progress was similarly slow. But elsewhere on Gold Beach, the British pushed inland effectively. Commandos from No. 47, Royal Marine Commando, fought their way toward Port-en-Bessin to link up with American forces from Omaha, though they wouldn't achieve this connection on D-Day itself. Inland British forces pushed toward Bayeux, making good progress despite pockets of resistance. By nightfall, the 50th Division had penetrated about 6 miles inland, the deepest advance of any division on D-Day, and was within sight of Bayeux, which would be captured the next day. British casualties at Gold Beach were relatively light, about 400 killed, wounded, or missing. The easternmost landing beach, Sword, was assigned to the British 3rd Infantry Division, reinforced by commandos and elements of the 1st Special Service Brigade under Brigadier Lord Lovat, who famously came ashore accompanied by his personal piper, Bill Millen, playing Highland Laddie under fire. The objective at Sword was the most ambitious of D-Day, to push rapidly inland and capture Caen, a city of 60,000 people and a crucial road hub. If Caen fell on D-Day, the Germans would be denied a vital transportation center, and the Allies would have room to maneuver inland from the beaches. The initial landings at Sword, like those at Juno, faced strong defenses. A massive fortification known as the Morris Strongpoint dominated part of the beach and took time to reduce. But the British, supported by DD tanks and specialized armor, fought their way off the beach and pushed inland. Lord Lovat's commandos had a specific mission: to reach and reinforce the British 6th Airborne Division holding the bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River. Fighting through German positions, Lovat's force reached the bridges by early afternoon, fulfilling one of D-Day's most important objectives. However, the advance on Caen stalled. The British faced increasing German resistance as they moved inland. Around midday, elements of the 21st Panzer Division, the only significant German armored force to counterattack on D-Day, struck the British advance. Though this attack was eventually repulsed, it delayed the British push toward Caen. By evening, British forces were still several miles from Caen. The failure to capture the city on D-Day would have significant consequences. Caen wouldn't fall until more than a month later, and the battle for the city would be one of the most brutal of the Normandy campaign. While the Allies were fighting desperately on the beaches, the German response was hampered by confusion, command problems, and the continuing effectiveness of Allied deception. When reports of the airborne landings began arriving, German commanders were uncertain whether this was the main invasion or a diversion. The Atlantic Wall's commander, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed it was too soon to commit the panzer reserves. General Friedrich Dahlmann, commanding the 7th Army in Normandy, was caught off guard. He had left his headquarters to participate in a war game exercise in Rennes. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who had been touring the Atlantic Wall's defenses for months and preparing for the invasion, wasn't even in France. Believing the weather made an invasion impossible, he had returned to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and to try to convince Hitler to station the panzer reserves closer to the coast. He wouldn't return to France until late on June 6th. The confusion extended to the highest levels. Hitler, who had stayed up late watching a film, was asleep when news of the invasion arrived. His aides, fearing his notorious rages, were reluctant to wake him. When he finally received the reports, he was uncertain whether Normandy was the main attack or a feint before the real invasion at Calais. The crucial panzer divisions of ISS Panzer Corps, positioned north of Paris, couldn't be moved without Hitler's personal authorization, and that authorization was delayed for precious hours. When German forces did respond, they faced constant harassment from Allied aircraft. The Allies had achieved complete air superiority over Normandy. Any significant German troop movement during daylight hours was spotted and attacked by fighter bombers. Reinforcements that should have reached the front in hours took days, traveling by night and hiding during the day. The 21st Panzer Division's counterattack against Sword Beach in the afternoon represented the Germans' best chance to throw the Allies back into the sea on D-Day, but it was too little, too late, and unsupported. By evening, it was clear that the Allies had achieved their lodgment. The question now was whether they could build it up faster than the Germans could reinforce their defenses. As darkness fell on June 6, 1944, the Allies controlled 5 separate beachheads along 50 miles of the Normandy coast. Nowhere had they achieved all their ambitious D-Day objectives. British and Canadian forces were still miles from Caen. Americans had penetrated only a mile or so inland from Omaha Beach, and the individual beaches hadn't linked up into a continuous front. But they were ashore. Over 156,000 Allied troops had landed by air and sea. Nearly 4,000 had been killed, with thousands more wounded or missing. Terrible losses, but far fewer than the pessimistic predictions. Some planners had feared losses of 75% or more in the first wave at Omaha. More importantly, the Allies were bringing ashore supplies, equipment, and reinforcements faster than the Germans could respond. The artificial mulberry harbors would be towed across and operational within days. The air campaign had crippled German communications and supply lines. The deception plans continued to work. German high command still believed a larger invasion was coming at Calais and kept crucial forces there for weeks. The German defenders had fought skillfully and bravely. Many positions held out for hours despite overwhelming Allied firepower. Individual German units counterattacked wherever possible, but the Atlantic Wall had been breached. Hitler's Fortress Europe had been cracked open. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Behind the strategic objectives and tactical details, D-Day was fundamentally a human story, a story of tens of thousands of young men, most in their 20s, late teens, or early 20s, who faced unimaginable danger and terror. Consider the perspective of a 19-year-old soldier crammed into a landing craft, tossed by waves, soaked by spray, many of his comrades vomiting from seasickness. He's carrying 60 or 70 pounds of equipment. He may never have been in combat before. He knows that when the ramp drops, he has to run forward into machine gun fire. He's seen friends die during training accidents. He's written what might be his last letter home. Why did they do it? Some fought for flag and country, believing deeply in the cause of defeating Nazi tyranny. Others fought for the men beside them. The bonds of unit cohesion are incredibly powerful, and soldiers will endure hell rather than let down their comrades. Some fought simply because they had no choice. They had orders, and the military system propelled them forward. Most fought for a complex mixture of all these reasons. Acts of heroism were commonplace. Medics who repeatedly exposed themselves to fire to treat wounded men. Soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Officers who stood upright under fire to rally their men. Sailors who brought their ships into point-blank range to provide fire support. Engineers who worked under fire to clear obstacles. Pilots who flew multiple sorties despite exhaustion and danger. Many heroes of D-Day never received recognition. The soldier who cut a path through barbed wire. The sergeant who led a squad up a cliff face. The sailor who kept his damaged landing craft running long enough to get troops ashore. The pilot who stayed in his burning plane to clear the way for following aircraft. History remembers generals and admirals, but D-Day was won by privates and corporals, by ordinary men who did extraordinary things. D-Day was more than just a battle. It was a turning point in World War II and in world history. To understand its significance, we need to consider what was at stake and what the invasion achieved. By June 1944, Nazi Germany had enslaved most of Europe. The Holocaust was in full operation, with millions of Jews, Roma, Slavs, political dissidents, and others being systematically murdered in concentration camps. Across occupied Europe, resistance fighters fought against German occupation, often facing brutal reprisals. The Soviet Union, while pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front, had suffered catastrophic losses. Over 20 million Soviet citizens would die in the war. The successful invasion of Normandy opened the Western Front that Stalin had long demanded. Now Germany had to fight major campaigns on two fronts simultaneously, stretching its resources to the breaking point. German divisions that might have been sent to stop the Soviet advance were instead tied down fighting the Western Allies. The invasion also demonstrated the industrial and organizational might of the Western democracies. The United States, Britain, and Canada had built this enormous invasion force from scratch. They had developed new technologies and tactics. They had coordinated air, land, and sea forces on an unprecedented scale. They had overcome seemingly insurmountable logistical challenges. The invasion sent a clear message. The Allied powers had the capability to project force anywhere and to sustain complex military operations. D-Day also had profound political implications. It ensured that Western Europe would be liberated by American, British, and Canadian forces rather than solely by the Soviet Union. This had enormous consequences for the post-war order. Nations liberated by Western forces, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, became democracies and part of the Western Alliance. Nations liberated by Soviet forces fell under communist control. The shape of the Cold War was determined in part by who liberated whom in 1944 and 1945. While D-Day itself was a crucial achievement, it was only the beginning of the Battle of Normandy, which would continue for more than 2 months. In the days immediately after D-Day, the priority was to link up the 5 beaches into a continuous front and to build up forces and supplies faster than the Germans could reinforce. American forces from Utah and Omaha linked up, then pushed across the Cottontan Peninsula to cut it off, before turning north toward Cherbourg. The port city was captured on June 26th, though the Germans had thoroughly demolished the port facilities. Around Caen, British and Canadian forces became bogged down in brutal fighting. The city sat at the hinge between the British and American sectors, and Montgomery's forces faced the bulk of German armored strength. The terrain, small fields divided by hedgerows and stone walls, favored the defenders. Multiple offensives failed to take Caen quickly. The city was devastated by Allied bombing and artillery, and tens of thousands of French civilians suffered. Caen would finally fall in mid-July, nearly 6 weeks late. The Americans faced their own challenges in the hedgerow country of the Bocage. Each small field was a potential fortress, and German defenders used the terrain masterfully. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards, purchased with heavy casualties. American ingenuity responded with the development of Rhino tanks, Sherman tanks fitted with steel tusks that could punch through the hedgerows. The breakthrough came in late July with Operation Cobra, a massive offensive that finally broke through German lines. American forces poured through the gap, beginning a rapid advance across France. Paris was liberated on August 25th. By early September, Allied forces had reached the German border. The Normandy campaign had cost both sides heavily. The Germans lost perhaps 400,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, and their forces in France were effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Nearly 81 years later, D-Day remains the largest amphibious invasion in history. It has never been equaled, and likely never will be. The operation demonstrated several crucial military principles that remain relevant today. First, the importance of combined arms operations. D-Day succeeded because it effectively coordinated infantry, armor, artillery, naval gunfire, and air power. No single element could have succeeded alone. Second, the value of innovation. From specialized armor to artificial harbors to airborne operations, D-Day showcased numerous technical and tactical innovations. Militaries that fail to innovate become obsolete. Third, the crucial role of intelligence and deception. Operation Fortitude's success in misleading German intelligence was as important as any division in the field. Modern military operations still rely heavily on intelligence and deception. Fourth, the importance of logistics. The invasion succeeded not just because of the fighting on D-Day, but because the Allies could sustain and build up their forces faster than the Germans could respond. As the saying goes, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Fifth, the human factor. Training, leadership, and morale matter. The American soldiers at Omaha Beach were not inherently superior to their German opponents, but they were well-trained, led by competent NCOs and officers, and motivated by a belief in their cause. D-Day also reminds us of the cost of freedom. The American military cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer, overlooking Omaha Beach, contains over 9,300 graves. The British cemetery at Bayeux holds over 4,000. These are just the Allied dead from the Normandy campaign. The total casualties, including wounded, missing, and captured, were far higher. Thousands of French civilians also died in the fighting and bombardment.